Welcome to Dad Filter's Survival Games Edition. I'm a dad with limited time and a growing Steam library and a kid who's eventually gonna ask, can we play together? So instead of guessing, I'm playing these games first mainly to see if they're actually worth sharing later on. I'm only asking two questions here. First, is this fun when you only have a couple of hours? And second, does this turn into a quality time with my son later down the line with moments we can actually use in real life, or is it just fun noise? I'm not breaking down graphics, I'm not comparing prices, and I'm definitely not arguing about frame rates. If a game is good enough to play with my kid one day, buying it twice shouldn't be a problem. One quick rule before we start. I don't give 7 out of 10. 7 is a safe answer, and safe answers are boring. Around here, a game is either a 6 or an 8. Either it's missing something important or it's clearly worth your time. That said, the final score is an average of 2 ratings, so sometimes math lands us in the middle. One more thing before we get into it, the gameplay you're seeing is raw, no fancy edits, no cinematic cuts, and no 10-hour deep dives. These are real sessions clipped straight from normal play because I'm a dad with limited time. And that also means the footage doesn't always show everything the game can do, so don't judge the entire game solely by these clips. Games matter. They spark creativity, problem solving, patience, and curiosity. They teach you to experiment, fail, adapt, and occasionally rebuild everything because you punched the wrong enemy. Some games are perfect for that, some are better appreciated later, and some are best enjoyed solo after a bedtime with volume low. Remember, this isn't about what's objectively best, it's about what fits this phase of my life. So here we go, from worst to best. Lord of the Rings Return to Moria was a game I was genuinely excited for. I bought it the day it came out. I'm a huge Lord of the Rings nerd, and dwarves are easily my favorite faction. I love underground bases, defensive playstyle, and slowly building something solid while everything else tries to break in. On paper, this game should have been perfect for me. Unfortunately, it ended up being fine. Not terrible, but not special either. I played it at launch, and while it had its moments, it never really hooked me. Combat is extremely basic. You've got one attack button, one block button, and that's pretty much the whole system. There is no depth, no builds to experiment with, and no real skill progression. Progression follows a simple rank gear path, which makes everything feel very linear. Base building exists, but if you're following the story, you're constantly moving. You don't really get to settle in and build something long term, which took away a lot of the joy for me. Boss fights were underwhelming and simple, and while there are moments where your camp gets attacked, which is a cool idea, those encounters lose their impact when combat itself is so shallow. Instead of feeling tense or exciting, they often just felt like busy work. That said, if you're a massive Lord of the Rings fan, there's still value there. The environment, ruins, and locations are beautifully done. Walking through Moria, seeing the scale of the halls, and exploring the remnants of dwarven cities is easily the best part of the game. If your main goal is to soak in atmosphere and lore, that's where you'll get the most for your time. Through the dad filter, based on my experience at launch, I'm rating this 5 out of 10. It's also worth noting that the game has received a ton of updates since release, so it may be in a much better place right now since I played it. I'll need to go back and give it another proper run before I can confidently update that rating, and that's what I'm planning to do later down the line. For playing with my son, I'm giving it 5 out of 10. The mechanics are simple and straightforward, which makes it accessible for younger teens. There are some fun moments with creativity, especially when restoring old cities or rebuilding parts of Moria together. Even singing while mining can turn into a nice shared moment. That said, there are definitely stronger survival games to play before this one. I would recommend Return to Moria mainly if your kid already loves Lord of the Rings and wants to spend more time in that universe. As a survival game, it's average. As a Tolkien experience, it's enjoyable and possibly better now than it was at launch. Valheim is one of those games that people absolutely love. Ask almost any survival fan and you'll hear that it's one of the best in the genre, with deep progression, multiple biomes, solid combat, and strong base building. I get why it's popular, but I'll be honest, it never really clicked for me. For my taste and my time constraints, I'm rating Valheim 6 out of 10. That doesn't mean it's bad, it just means it is bad for me. My biggest issue with Valheim is how tedious it can be. You build a base and it's constantly being harassed by enemies. You build it out of wood and then the rain starts damaging it, so now you have to repair it constantly instead of progressing. You venture into the new biome and suddenly you're getting one shot because you're not geared correctly yet. A lot of the challenges feel less like learning and more like punishment. Travel is where game really lost me. Sailing is realistic, which is impressive, but also mean it can be painfully slow. You have to manage wind direction, which sounds cool on paper, but in practice it just makes already long trips even longer. Yes, there are teleporters, but you can't teleport with certain materials, so you end up sailing back and forth anyway. Some bosses require items found in specific biomes, which means you're sailing out, finding what you need, sailing back, and sometimes repeating that process multiple times. Later areas introduce things like constant mist, which just adds another layer of friction. Valheim is absolutely a good game for players who enjoy long grinds, slow travel, and methodical progression, but for me specifically, especially as a dad with limited time, it felt like too much work for too little payoff. Some resources often don't respawn, so once a dungeon is cleared, you're off searching for another one instead of refining what you already have. Over time, it just started to feel exhausting rather than rewarding. For playing with my kid, I'm giving Valheim 4 out of 10. There are some things you can teach, like sailing basics, patience, maybe some light planning, but that's where real-world learning mostly stops. You can talk about creativity and building, but that's true for almost every survival game. There aren't many practical systems here that translate cleanly into real-life concepts the way mechanical or engineering-focused games do. I know a lot of people love Valheim for its Viking theme, atmosphere, and difficulty curve, and that's totally fair, it's just not my thing. It is unlikely for me to pick up this game as a bonding game with my son unless he discovers it on his own and really wants to try. Valheim passes for dedicated survival fans with lots of time, but through the dead filter it lands firmly 5 out of 10, respectable but not something I'm excited to come back to. Enshrouded is another game that's wildly popular and often mentioned as one of the best survival games out there. I know this might get some hate, but for me it's the worst of the best survival games. I played it right at launch, and to be fair, it does have great visual style and some genuinely beautiful locations. The building system is also very impressive, especially for people who really love detailed construction. You can get extremely precise with building pieces, everything is destructible, and yes, you can absolutely roleplay as a dwarf digging into the mountain. That said, the game completely lost me. I got hard stuck on the fell dragon and died to it too many times. I finished Dark Souls 3 and Elden Ring without any help, and honestly, Mid-Deer felt more fair than this fight. I've tried coming back to Enshrouded multiple times after the launch, but I just can't force myself to play for more than 15 minutes at a time. I can't even fully explain why, it just feels wonky. Mining feels off, like your pickaxe is never quite hitting what you want, and instead of mining a rock, I'm mining under it. Building menu feels oddly complicated, especially compared to something like 7 Days to Die, which has more blocks, but it feels a lot cleaner to use. Combat never hooked me, and the whole mechanic where you touch the corrupted areas that drains your time just felt frustrating rather than interesting. I died to it too many times, and not in a way that made me want to improve. Overall, the game feels closer to Roblox than a true Minecraft successor, at least to me. Because of that, I'm giving Enshrouded 5 out of 10. I know a lot of people love it, and you can make a meaningful progression in just a few hours, but it simply doesn't click for me. For playing with my son, I rated 6 out of 10. Creativity is definitely a strong point here. You can build incredible detailed bases, fly around, explore, and just mess around, which is fun. That said, I haven't really found a strong real-life lessons or teachable skills to transfer beyond general creativity and imagination. It's not a bad game, it's just not a game I'm excited to share for learning or problem solving with my son. Icarus is one of those survival games that split the community right down the middle. Some people sink hundreds of hours into it and others bounce off after just a few. I was firmly in the second group at first. I played it briefly, dropped it, and didn't get the appeal at all. Then I decided to give it a proper second chance, and that's when it surprised me. On my second go, I ended up sinking around 30 to 35 hours into it, which tells me there's definitely something there. The turning point for me was around level 10. Before that, the game feels unnecessarily restrictive. You're grinding for XP, barely able to do anything meaningful, and honestly feels silly how limited you are before unlocking basic crafting stations. Once you get that past early wall though, the game opens up. Suddenly the progression loop starts to make sense. Icarus isn't especially hard, but it does overwhelm you with skill trees and blueprints, but something about its rhythm pulled me in for a while. The game is definitely on the grindier side, but it's a calmer grind compared to many other survival games. Hunting feels satisfying, building is solid, and the world itself feels peaceful rather than constantly hostile. Combat exists, but it's not the focus, and most of the time you're just surviving, exploring, and setting up your little corner of the planet. Where Icarus loses points for me is in the content depth and mission design. Some missions boil down to deliver a massive amount of materials, which doesn't feel challenging so much as time consuming. Because of that, I'm rating Icarus 6 out of 10 for me. It's not bad, it just doesn't have enough variety to keep pulling me back long term. That said, if you're looking for a survival game that's more relaxed, with minimal combat and just chill atmosphere, this one actually works really well. It's the kind of game you play to unwind rather than adrenaline dump, which might be a good pick for dads. For playing with my son, I'm also giving it a 6 out of 10. There are some genuinely good teachable moments here. The game introduces concepts like oxygen not being naturally available on the planet, filtering water, using charcoal, and dealing with environmental threats like storm, wind, and lightning that can actually damage or burn wooden structures. Those systems can easily turn into real-life conversations about survival, chemistry, weather, and how environments shape how we build. There are also animal interactions and taming, though I'll admit that part gets a bit awkward from parenting perspective, especially when the process involving removing the parent from the picture and relocating the baby. That's one of those moments where you might want to skip the explanation and just move on. Overall, Icarus isn't a must-play survival game, but it's a solid one. It's worth picking up once you're gone through the top tier survival titles and just want something more peaceful to relax with. Through the DAT filter, it lands comfortably at 6 out of 10. Not unforgettable, but surprisingly decent if you're in the right mood and just want to chill for a bit. Ark is another game that a lot of people consider the perfect survival experience. And I get it. Dinos, open world, base building, taming, progression. On paper, this sounds unbeatable. I'll be honest though, while I do have decent number of hours in Ark and some good memories with it, I never really went deep into the late game. I tamed flying dinos, T-Rexes, and a bunch of farming dinos, but I never touched dungeons, bosses, DLCs, or additional maps. So my experience here is solid but limited. Because of that, and because of how game feels today, I'm ranking Ark 6 out of 10 for me. I enjoyed it at times, but from my perspective, the game really needs a rehaul. It's an older title, and a lot of systems feel junky by modern standards. Combat is extremely basic, you mostly just hit the attack button and hope for the best. Yes, things get a bit more interesting once you have dinos doing the fighting for you, but it never really hooked me. Taming can take literal hours unless you tweak the settings, and that alone can be a deal breaker if you don't have endless time. Base building also feels more like a job than a creative outlet. You're often forced to build massive ugly structures just to keep your dinos safe, which turns it into a function over beauty situation. On top of that, the world is brutally unforgiving. Being the wrong place at the wrong time and you're dead no matter how prepared you think you are. The same goes for your dinos, and losing one you spent hours taming is genuinely heartbreaking. Ark is a very much grind heavy game, especially on servers, and that grind never really clicked with me. That said, when it comes to playing Ark with my son, it jumps to 8 out of 10. Dinos are endlessly fascinating. Imagine going to a natural history museum and then coming home to play Ark or other way around. What kid doesn't love dinos? They were real creatures and lived on our planet hundreds of millions of years ago, and here we can see them, tame them, ride them, and build the world around them. That alone makes this game incredibly engaging and surprisingly educational. There are a lot of room for real conversations here about prehistoric life, ecosystem, survival, responsibility, and even loss when something goes wrong. It's not just fun, it's memorable. Ark feels like one of those games that could spark curiosity well beyond the screens. So yes, this is absolutely a game I would want to experience with my son one day, just not at default settings. When that time comes, I'll definitely be adjusting server settings just to reduce the grind and focus more on exploration, learning, and actually enjoying the time together. Through the dad filter, I'm scoring it 7 out of 10. Ark may be flawed to me, but it's still a strong bonding game when played the right way. If I had to name top 3 survival games of all time, Conan Exiles would absolutely be on that list, and honestly, it might even fight for the top spot. It has pretty much everything a survival game needs. There is a story, but it doesn't hold your hand or talk at you for 3 hours straight. The combat feels very good and diverse, the progression is well paced, and the game gives you a lot of freedom in how you approach it. You can grind if you want, explore if you want, or just build for hours without feeling like you're doing something wrong. One of the biggest reasons Conan works so well for me as a dad with limited time is how quickly it lets you feel accomplished. Even in the first few hours you can already build something impressive, not just a sad little start or hut that you abandon immediately, but an actual structure that feels meaningful. The building system is very deep with a ton of different pieces, cosmetics, styles, and materials, and it's very easy to lose track of time trying to make something just a little better. Customization is another big win, with lots of different armor sets, paints, builds, and playstyles that actually feel distinct. The map itself is massive and genuinely diverse. You've got desert, snow, jungle, ruins, dungeon, volcano, and wide variety of creatures to fight. It doesn't feel copy-paste, and there's always something new to stumble on. There's also lots of legendary loot to grind for if that's your thing. I'm not a big PvP player myself, but even I can see that Conan offers plenty there, including base raiding and large-scale battles, all the way up to summoning massive godlike beings to destroy enemy structures, because apparently normal explosions just weren't dramatic enough. It's a game for me as a dad with limited time. This is 10 out of 10. It respects your time, gives you meaningful progression early on, and lets you choose how deep you want to go. From pure survival game perspective, this is one of the strongest packages out there. When it comes to playing with your kid under 16 years old, though, I'm giving it 5 out of 10. Not because it's a bad game, but because of what it contains. Even with nudity turned off, Conan deals with a lot of heavy themes. The game introduces capturing people by knocking them out, forcing them to work, binding, transporting them, belief system tied to sacrifice, and generally dark subjects matter that requires maturity and context to understand properly. This isn't your cozy survival game, and it's definitely not something I would casually hand to a younger teenager. Once a kid is around 16 or older, I think the conversation changes. At that age, they're capable of critical thinking and understanding that games can explore uncomfortable ideas without endorsing them. In that context, Conan can actually become interesting rather than overwhelming, and it can spark conversations about history, belief system, power, and consequences. My son is currently 1 year and 5 months old, which means waiting for another 15 years to play Conan together might be a stretch even by dad patient standards, but still, when he is older, this is a game I would consider sharing intentionally, but not casually. 7 Days to Die is easily in my top 3 survival games ever made too. It's been in development for a very long time, and that shows in both good and bad ways. I can't give it a perfect score because it still feels rough around the edges. Sometimes combat is clunky, movement isn't smooth, and visually it's very much function over beauty. It still has that early access feel even though it has been out for a bit, but if you can push past that initial roughness and spend a little time with it, the depth underneath is incredible. There's no real story here, but the progression system is deep and meaningful. One of the standout features is the building and physics system. Every block has weight and structural integrity, which means structures can collapse if you build them wrong. This alone puts it ahead of most survival games. The game is also unforgiving in a way that feels intentional. You break a leg, put on a cast, and you're still stuck dealing with the consequences for a very long time. The world feels isolated with only traders and zombies, which gives it lonely end of the world atmosphere that works surprisingly well. The entire world is fully destructible, which is why I almost always end up building underground and playing like a post-apocalyptic dwarf. Every 7 in-game days a blood moon horde spawns and knows exactly where you are. They don't wander, they come straight to your base and actively try to tear it apart. It forces planning, engineering, and constant rebuild. On top of that, every building in the world is essentially a dungeon, ranging from short and simple to long and brutal, which keeps exploration interesting. For me personally, I would rate this 9 out of 10. However, for dads with limited time, I'm rating it 8 out of 10, mostly because of pace. One in-game day is 60 minutes, so reaching your first night takes over 7 real-life hours, which is a big commitment if you're squeezing in playtime after the bedtime. When it comes to playing with a kid under 16, I'm giving it an 8 out of 10, and this is where the game really shines. It's rated M for mature, mostly because of the gore and blood, not because of heavy or uncomfortable themes. If you're okay with that, this game is packed with real-world learning opportunities. You're constantly dealing with structural engineering concepts like load bearing, supports, and material strength. Crafting involves engine, batteries, mechanical parts, tools, and vehicle systems that mirror how things work in real life. Making cement, steel, and concrete requires proper processing through furnace, crucible, and mixers. There's even electricity, wiring, generators, and traps which can naturally lead to conversations about how power systems work. It's one of those games where learning happens without feeling like learning. You're solving problems, fixing mistakes, and improving designs through trial and error. If you're okay with some gore and blood for your kids, 7 Days to Die easily passes the dead filter and offers one of the best examples of hands-on problem solving in survival games. Satisfactory is a tough one to rate because it's not really a survival game in a traditional sense. You're not fighting hunger, thirst, or enemies. Most of the time, you're surviving your own factory decisions. The core of the game is resource grinding and optimizing production lines, and if that sounds appealing, this game can easily become dangerous for your free time. Visually, it is a stunning game and it's very easy to pick up and start. You can jump in, start gathering resources, and begin building without feeling overwhelmed. Where Satisfactory starts to separate people is in a few hours, when simple production turns into combined systems. Once you're chaining materials into new resources, things escalate very quickly. I'll be very honest, I wasn't smart enough to get to the late game. I never made it past coal-powered machines. I tried moving into steam power, and that's where it started to fall apart for me. Getting water to the right machines, balancing the flow, and keeping everything powered consistently became a problem. At that point, the game stops being about building and starts being about math, planning, and systems thinking. Because of that, this game clearly targets a very specific audience, people who genuinely enjoy optimizing production chains. As a solo dad with limited time, I'm rating Satisfactory 6 out of 10. You can still accomplish a lot in a few hours, and if you're wired for this kind of thinking, this game can easily hit 8 or higher. For me though, I'll say it honestly, my brain checked out before my factory did. Playing with my kid though, it's a completely different story. For that, Satisfactory is 10 out of 10. This game is packed with real world lessons and they are baked directly into the systems. You start with basic energy sources like plants, wood, and biomass, then move to coal, steam, and more advanced power generation. You're constantly dealing with wiring, electricity distribution, and energy limits in ways that feel surprisingly realistic. One moment that stood out to me is when the factory shuts down like a breaker because you've connected too many machines. That's a perfect real-life example of power consumption and overload, and it's the kind of thing you can immediately connect to how electricity works at home. On top of that, you're constantly learning about efficiency through bottlenecks and planning ahead. If you build something poorly, it doesn't explode, it just stops working, which is often worse and much more educational. This is absolutely a game I would want to share with my son, but with one caveat. Either you play it yourself first or you have someone experienced help you guide you through it because complexity ramps up fast. That said, if you're looking for a game that teaches system thinking, problem solving, and how the real world handles production and energy satisfactory isn't just good, it's one of the best tools you can use. Through that filter, it's a must play for kids and a respectable challenge for dads. Raft is another great example of a survival game that actually feels unique. Instead of starting in a forest or a desert, you're surviving on a floating platform in the middle of the ocean, slowly building it out as you drift from place to place. One of the rare survival games that actually has a story, and that story is genuinely well done. On the surface, it looks simple, but it gets more detailed the further you go. You can build your raft wide, tall, or layered, and the locations you visit feel distinct and purposeful rather than random. That said, the early game is slow, very slow. Fishing trash out of the ocean can become tedious pretty quickly, and the first few hours are a definite grind. Combat exists, but it's simple and never the real main focus. Visually, the game is clean and stylized rather than realistic, and it works. If you enjoy story-driven survival games and don't mind calm pace, Raft is easy 8 out of 10 for me. Where Raft really shines is a game to play with kids. For playing with my son, this is a 10 out of 10. It's easy to pick up at a younger age, there's no complex mechanics to memorize, and there's no gore or graphical content. The system is intuitive, which makes it perfect for shared play. More important, the game naturally opens the door to a lot of real-life conversations without forcing them. You can talk about why you can't drink salt water and how filtering and desalination works. You can talk about resource scarcity, waste, and why managing what you have matters. The story itself touches on environmental collapse, rising sea levels, abandoned cities, and what happens when people don't plan ahead. Floating cities and isolated communities become a starting point for conversations about climate change, sustainability, and how fragile systems really are. Raft also teaches practical problem solving, farming food in limited space, optimizing your raft layout with collecting nets, planning storage, and deciding what's worth keeping versus throwing away, all mirror real life decision making. It encourages teamwork without stress, experimentation without punishment, and curiosity without fear. There is also a strong emotional element to the story. You're constantly uncovering what happened to the world and the people in it, which creates moments to talk about empathy, responsibility, and consequences. It's the kind of game where learning happens naturally while you're just trying to survive another day at sea. Through the Dat Filter, Raft isn't just a good survival game, it's one of the best examples of how games can be fun, meaningful, and genuinely educational at the same time. Grounded is my third 10 out of 10 survival game, and honestly, it earns that score without much effort. The premise is simple. You are tiny, stuck in a backyard and trying to survive among insects that are suddenly the size of trucks. What makes it special? How perfect it executes that idea. Grounded nails every core survival element. The progression is deep but never overwhelming. The environments are beautiful and varied, the building system is excellent, and the story is genuinely engaging. It doesn't feel like a gimmick, it feels fully thought out. The pacing is one of the biggest strengths. The tutorial is clear, surviving never feels like a chore, and you can accomplish a lot in just a few hours. It respects your time while still offering depth if you want it. The world is packed with resources, different builds, and optimization paths, but it never feels bloated. Even after spending a long time with it, I genuinely struggle to find anything bad to say about this game. It's unique, polished, and consistently fun. The only thing I'll flag is the combat system. To play Grounded properly, you need to learn how to parry. Blocking alone won't save you against tougher bugs, and if you're ignoring parrying, the game will punish you. Once you learn it, though, combat becomes incredibly satisfying. The difficulty does ramp up towards the end, especially with major boss fights, but those aren't required to finish the game. On top of that, Grounded has a fantastic replayability. New Game Plus lets you replay it almost like Souls game, experimenting with different builds and strategies. For me, this is an easy 10 out of 10 survival game that I can recommend to dads. Playing this with my kid is also 10 out of 10, and this is where Ground really shines. The game is basically an interactive natural documentary. You're exploring real insect ecosystems up close, ant nests, termite colonies, spider webs, and wasp hives, all scaled in a way that makes them fascinating instead of abstract. It's an incredible way to introduce kids to how insects live, work together, and survive in their natural habitat. You can talk about food chains, ecosystems, and why certain insects behave the way they do. You can explain why ants work collectively, how spiders hunt, how bees pollinate, and how different bugs defend their territory. The game is also naturally introduces concepts like resource management, crafting from natural materials, and adapting to your environment instead of fighting it. Even building bases become a lesson, planning, stability, and problem solving. What I really like is that learning happens organically. You're not stopping the game to teach, you're teaching because the game invites questions. It's similar to Ark with dinos, but in some ways even better because insects are something kids can actually see in real life. Grounded turns curiosity into engagement and exploration into understanding. Through the Dead filter, this isn't just a great survival game, it's one of the best games you can ever share with your kid. That's my list through the dad filter from worst to best. If you're a dad who plays survival games, I'm curious, do you agree with these rankings or am I completely wrong on some of them? What games would you actually play with your kid and which ones are staying in the after the bedtime only category? Let me know, I'm genuinely interested to hear how other dads see it.